The Grand Canyon is breathtaking, but for the tourists who left their common sense at the rim, it became the last thing they ever saw. From a tourist doing one-hand pull-ups beyond the safety railing, to a fashion student who learned the hard way why high heels and the Grand Canyon don't mix. Hi, it's Tucker, and you're watching Last Moments. It was June 17, 2019, at Mather Point on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The afternoon heat pushed past 94 degrees as hot wind rose from the canyon walls below. Tourists crowded the overlook, moving through dusty walkways and packed railings while cameras clicked non-stop under the brutal Arizona sun. Nolan Pierce was 23 and worked the front desk at a mid-level gym chain in Mesa. On the side, he ran small personal training sessions for extra cash and spent almost every free hour trying to grow his social media pages. He had around 3,000 followers on Instagram and had recently gone all in on TikTok that spring. Most of his videos followed the same pattern: shirtless workouts near dangerous places, motivational captions about living without fear, cliffside pull-ups, anything that made normal situations look more intense on camera. And as I scroll through his page, I can really tell he really wanted his content to feel bigger and more exciting each time. But Nolan wasn't a professional athlete. He looked like a guy who realized that the riskier the shot, the more attention he'd get. That day, he brought his 17-year-old brother Eli to film content with him at Mather Point. According to Eli, Nolan spent nearly 2 hours recording workouts and poses near the rim, but he kept getting frustrated because every shot had something ruining it: a railing, a tourist, or somebody in the background. Eventually, he spotted a narrow sandstone shelf beyond the safety railing that jutted out like a diving board over the abyss. He told Eli the shot would look legendary if he filmed from a low angle, while Nolan performed pull-ups off the very edge of the cliff. Eli told him not to do it. A couple nearby warned him too, but Nolan just laughed, said his grip strength was elite, and climbed over the railing anyway. What really stands out to me is how casually he treated a 2,000-foot drop once people started watching. A few tourists stopped to watch as Nolan lay on his stomach and lowered his legs over the side to test his handhold. Satisfied with the grip, he told Eli the final clip was going to be explosive pull-ups. He wanted to drop down, hang by his fingers with nothing but 2,000 feet of air below him, and power through 5 reps for the camera. To Nolan, it was a display of strength, but for me, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Eli was filming vertically from a few feet away. Nolan gripped the rough limestone edge and lowered his full body weight into the void. He completed 2 reps successfully, but on the third he tried to add a flair for the video, releasing one hand to wave at the camera while hanging by the other. The concentrated pressure of his entire body weight on that single point of weathered sandstone was too much. A chunk of the rim, weakened by erosion and the heat, snapped cleanly off. His remaining hand clutched the broken rock as his momentum swung his body outward. There was no rotation, no chance to spring back, just the sudden violent loss of an anchor. His arms shot out, clawing at the vertical face, but the sandstone was dry and crumbling. It's a chilling sight because we know, with Grand Canyon Falls, that's usually the moment everything becomes irreversible. Once your weight shifts too far past the edge, there's really nothing left to grab. Nolan disappeared over the side. The section below Mather Point isn't one clean, vertical drop. It's layers of jagged ledges, uneven cliff bands, and rock shelves stacked all the way down. As he fell, his body struck multiple surfaces before finally coming to rest on a ledge around 200 feet below the rim. Witnesses later even described hearing several impacts during the descent. The reaction from the crowd was immediate. Eli kept holding the phone up for several seconds after Nolan disappeared, like he still hadn't processed what happened. A tourist called 911 almost immediately, and recovery crews later used technical rope systems to reach Nolan below the rim. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental. Nolan died from multiple blunt force injuries caused by repeated impacts against the rock ledges below the rim. The trauma to his head, chest, and spine was so severe that investigators determined the injuries were not survivable. He was pronounced dead at the scene. After the incident, Nolan's family asked people online to stop posting the video. Most copies were eventually removed, though clips continued spreading across smaller pages for months afterward. In the end, Nolan became another name on the growing list of Grand Canyon fatalities. One more person who learned too late how unforgiving the canyon can be once a mistake starts. Nolan's story feels reckless right away, but the next case scares me more because it starts with something almost everyone would have done without thinking twice. It was September 8, 2016, near the North Rim's Cape Royal Trail, where patches of old snow and compacted ice still remained inside shaded rock crevices from the previous winter. The afternoon was cool compared to the South Rim, and small groups of hikers moved quietly between overlooks while wind pushed through the pine trees above the canyon walls. Tessa Vaughn was 25 years old and worked as a cartoonist in Fort Collins, Colorado. Most weekends, she was out hiking somewhere, not for social media or attention, but because she genuinely loved being outdoors. Friends described her as overly careful. She picked up trash on trails and double-checked everybody else's water supply before hikes. For me, she's the kind of person we all assume would never end up in a story like this. And weirdly enough, the thing people remembered most about her was her water bottle. It was this scratched-up insulated flask covered in stickers from old trips and closed-down coffee shops. She carried it everywhere. That weekend, Tessa visited the canyon with 2 co-workers before work started again on Monday. Near one of the shaded overlooks, she set the bottle down while taking photos. A gust of wind knocked it sideways, and it rolled off the trail before disappearing into a narrow rock depression below the overlook. At first, nobody thought it was a big deal. The bottle was still visible about 15 feet down inside a sloped crack between the rocks. From above, it honestly looked reachable. One co-worker told her to forget it, but Tessa kept insisting she could grab it in less than a minute. And while researching that part of the canyon, one thing kept coming up. Those narrow rock crevices are dangerous because they hide unstable footing, loose debris, and colder surfaces that don't look risky until someone is already inside them. Tessa carefully climbed down into the crack, using tree roots and exposed rock for footing. At first, everything seemed stable. She reached the bottle easily and even joked back up to her co-workers that she was fine. But the deeper section of the crevice stayed cold year-round, and underneath the loose dirt was a layer of compacted ice hidden beneath dust and gravel. The moment she shifted her weight to climb back out, her boot slid sideways. One co-worker later said it looked like the ground disappeared underneath her. Tessa dropped deeper into the fissure feet first and slammed hard against the narrowing rock walls below. But the fall itself wasn't what trapped her. The deeper the crack went, the tighter it became, until her body ended up wedged diagonally between the stone walls. For me, this is the hardest part of the story, because Tessa was still awake and talking to her co-workers at first. They could hear her below them, but they couldn't physically reach her. Every attempt to pull her up only compressed the rock tighter around her chest, slowly making it harder for her to breathe. Rangers arrived with technical rescue equipment, but the shape of the crevice made extraction extremely difficult. By the time rescuers managed to stabilize the opening enough to reach her, Tessa had stopped responding. Recovery crews spent hours widening parts of the fissure before they could finally remove Tessa's body. Her belongings, including the bottle, were later returned to her family in Colorado. Her co-workers stayed behind to speak with investigators, and later admitted they kept replaying the moment, wondering if they should have stopped her from climbing down. And afterward, the detail people couldn't stop talking about was the bottle itself. It was still tightly clutched in Tessa's hand when rescuers finally reached her. Tessa's case honestly frustrated me, because it all happened over a water bottle that probably didn't seem worth risking your life. But this next story somehow gets even dumber, because it starts with a group of friends risking the edge of the Grand Canyon just for one photo together. It was May 25, 2015, along Bright Angel Trail on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The morning started cool and clear, with dry air that made the distant north rim look close enough to touch. But by early afternoon, the weather began shifting fast. Heat rising out of the canyon started building unstable storm clouds overhead, and distant thunder slowly echoed across the rock walls. For a group of 6 friends from South Korea, this was their final horizon before graduation. Among them was Minho Park, 28, a guy known for being the life of the party and the one who always insisted on their group tradition. the synchronized jump. It was a simple ritual: line up, count to 3, and capture a photo mid-air. They had already done it in Seoul, Tokyo, and San Francisco, and I can see why they thought the Grand Canyon had to be the grand finale. As they moved down the Bright Angel switchbacks, they got frustrated with the photos. The canyon looked flat on camera, so when they spotted a narrow slab of limestone sticking out from the trail, they saw it as the perfect photo spot hanging over the edge. And this is usually how these accidents start. Nobody thinks they're doing something extreme at first. A passing hiker even warned them that the wind was getting stronger, but Minho laughed it off and said he had gymnast legs. Instead of a group photo, he decided the best shot would be him doing a high-tuck jump while everyone else cheered behind him. By that point, the weather had changed completely. The wind was no longer steady. Hot air rising from the canyon was feeding a fast-building thunderstorm directly overhead, and the exposed limestone fin had become one of the highest uncovered points along that stretch of trail. And that's what makes canyon storms so dangerous. One minute they sound far away, and the next they're directly overhead. Minho moved to the very end of the rock while another friend set the camera timer. The first flash of lightning hit somewhere deeper inside the canyon only seconds before the photo was taken. Witnesses later said they heard thunder almost immediately after, which meant the storm cell was already dangerously close. And I see that as the ultimate warning sign. At that point, they don't need equipment or forecasts. The canyon itself is telling you exactly what's about to happen. As Minho jumped, a second lightning strike hit the rim area. Rangers later believed the bolt either struck the limestone fin directly or hit nearby rock and side flashed through the ground. Several hikers on the trail reported feeling a violent shock travel through the stone beneath their feet. The strike hit so fast that Minho never even got the chance to land properly. Witnesses said they saw a huge white flash around him, followed by a crack so loud it echoed through the canyon walls. His body twisted sideways in the air before slamming hard onto the limestone and rolling back onto the trail without moving again. And honestly, this is what makes desert storms so dangerous. Most people think lightning only becomes a problem once the rain starts pouring. But in places like the Grand Canyon, the lightning usually shows up first. Sometimes the storm doesn't even look that close until it's already right on top of you. Several members of the group were knocked to the ground by the electrical current moving through the rock. One friend temporarily lost hearing in his left ear, while another suffered burns along his ankle where the electricity exited through a metal hiking pole. The camera, sitting on a tripod a few feet away, captured the exact moment of the strike. In the final frame, Minho is frozen mid-jump while the entire background behind him is illuminated white from the lightning flash. Rangers reached the group roughly 20 minutes later, after nearby hikers used emergency call boxes farther up the trail. Medical responders found severe electrical burns across Minho's shoulder, chest, and neck. The medical examiner later determined he died from cardiac arrest caused by the lightning strike, combined with catastrophic head trauma from the impact against the rock. His family in South Korea eventually received his belongings. They kept the camera, but deleted the final image from the memory card. According to one of his friends, nobody in the group could look at the flash in the background without remembering the sound that came right after it. What really gets me about that story is how fast confidence can turn into disaster at the canyon. And in the next case, the danger doesn't come from a group decision. It comes from one man becoming way too confident in himself. It was October 3rd, 2014, somewhere along the Tonto platform inside Grand Canyon National Park. From above, the area looks wide open and easy to cross, but once you're down there, everything starts blending. Dry washes, pale sandstone, scattered brush, and long stretches of terrain that all look almost identical. Honestly, I can see how someone could lose direction fast out there. Edwin was 50 years old and lived in Springfield, Missouri. He ran a small YouTube channel about old-fashioned living, restoring furniture by hand, writing letters instead of emails, and making calm videos about forgotten skills and tools. He only had a small audience, but based on the comments on his accounts, I can see that people genuinely liked him. Over time, though, his videos started taking on a more stubborn tone. He became obsessed with the idea that modern technology was making people helpless, especially GPS and smartphones, and that mindset is what led him to the canyon in the first place. A few months earlier, Edwin bought an antique brass compass from an estate sale. It supposedly dated back to the 1920s, and he treated it almost like proof that older methods were better. He started featuring it constantly in his videos, using it as both a tool and a statement. And while researching this case, this was the part that really stood out to me. There's a huge difference between appreciating old tools and trusting your life to equipment that may not even be accurate anymore, especially somewhere as unforgiving as the Grand Canyon. Edwin entered the canyon carrying a paper map, a small notebook, and the antique compass. To be fair, he actually prepared beforehand. He read trail guides, studied canyon navigation, and planned his route carefully. But he understood the theory more than the reality. He never properly accounted for magnetic declination, and he had no way of knowing whether the antique compass was still accurate after decades of wear. And the worst part, Edwin never told anyone his exact route. He wanted to hike part of the Tonto platform to prove people relied too much on GPS and phones. What he did not know is this area is deceptively dangerous because small navigation mistakes slowly become bigger ones. By midday, temperatures were already above 95 degrees. At some point, Edwin stopped checking his notes and began trusting the compass almost completely. He even uploaded a short video saying modern hikers had forgotten how to trust their instincts. About 30 minutes later, investigators believe he unknowingly drifted into a drainage, leading him away from the actual trail system. By late afternoon, Edwin realized he was trapped inside a dry box canyon surrounded by steep sandstone walls. He still had enough daylight to backtrack, but instead, he convinced himself he could push forward and reconnect with the route farther ahead. The deeper he moved into the drainage, the hotter the canyon became. The walls blocked most of the wind, and Edwin had already burned through more water than expected trying to navigate. At one point, investigators believe he attempted to climb down a dry waterfall pour-off roughly 12 feet high instead of turning around. The descent looked manageable from above, but halfway down, loose sediment shifted under his boot. He dropped awkwardly onto the rocks below and severely injured his right ankle. And for me, this is the worst part of this case. Edwin wasn't killed instantly, he was stranded. Investigators later reconstructed the next several hours through camera footage, voice recordings, and notes found in his backpack. At first, Edwin still believed he could crawl his way back out. He recorded short clips trying to stay calm, saying he only needed time to rest before moving again. But as the evening went on, his condition deteriorated fast. Temperatures inside the canyon stayed dangerously hot well after sunset, and Edwin had almost no water left by that point. With the broken ankle limiting movement, he couldn't climb back over the pour-off he had descended earlier. The next morning, another visitor noticed Edwin's vehicle still parked at the trailhead and reported him overdue. Search crews eventually found him about 38 hours later inside the drainage. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by dehydration and environmental exposure complicated by traumatic injuries to the ankle and lower leg. But the detail that really stayed with investigators came afterward. Inside Edwin's notebook were the correct navigation calculations he had worked out before the hike. He had already solved the route the night before. At some point during the trip, he simply stopped following the notes and trusted the antique compass instead. What is frustrating about this case is that Edwin trusted old technology too much. But the next guy did the complete opposite, and somehow it led to the exact same outcome. It was July 18, 2018, near the tip-off rest area along the South Kaibab Trail. By late morning, the canyon heat had already become dangerous. Storm clouds were also building across northern Arizona, and during monsoon season, rangers constantly warn hikers that flash floods can hit the canyon long before rain ever reaches them. Leo Mercer, a 31-year-old freelance UX designer from Seattle, loved testing unfinished tech in real-world conditions. One of his friends had asked him to try an early mixed-reality hiking system designed to project digital trail markers directly onto a live camera feed inside a modified headset. The idea sounded futuristic. Hikers could follow glowing arrows overlaid onto the real canyon itself. The problem was, this thing had never actually been tested somewhere as complicated as the Grand Canyon. Now I can kind of see why Leo kept giving it the benefit of the doubt at first. And at first, The glitches didn't seem serious enough to stop using it. The labels drifted around a little, distance markers lagged, and sometimes the trail overlay floated a few feet away from the real path before snapping back into place. And that's probably why Leo kept trusting it. By early afternoon, thunderheads had started building above the canyon rim. The rain wasn't falling near Leo yet, but distant storms were already dumping water into drainage systems farther north. And as Leo moved past the tip-off area, the headset suddenly projected a glowing route marker into a nearby side canyon. The overlay labeled it as a trail continuation and estimated it would reconnect farther ahead with the main route. But there was no trail. What Leo had actually followed was a dry wash, basically a narrow drainage channel carved by seasonal floodwater. The route actually looked believable. There were footprints, flattened gravel, and scattered cairns left behind by other lost hikers. The canyon walls slowly narrowed around him as he continued deeper inside while recording troubleshooting notes for the developers. Investigators later confirmed the drainage Leo entered was not part of any maintained trail system. Rangers said unofficial paths often form there because lost hikers repeatedly make the same wrong turn, which slowly creates what looks like a legitimate route. Then the signal began cutting out. The overlay flickered, and the arrows disappeared. And when Leo finally removed the headset completely, he realized the drainage behind him looked almost identical in every direction. And this is the part that really got to me while researching the case. Once you get deep enough into those side canyons, the Grand Canyon stops feeling open and massive. It starts feeling more like a narrow stone hallway with almost nowhere to go. About 30 minutes later, Leo recorded another voice note. This one sounded different. His breathing was heavier now. In the background, there was a low rumbling noise he didn't recognize yet. The storm wasn't above him. It was upstream. Investigators later determined that a monsoon storm several miles away had triggered a flash flood inside the drainage Leo was standing in. And honestly, this is what makes canyon floods so terrifying. The rain doesn't even have to be near you. Witnesses said the flood sounded like a freight train echoing through the canyon walls, and Leo's final recording captured the same thing. His calm troubleshooting notes suddenly turned confused, then panicked as the noise got closer. Search teams later concluded the first surge hit Leo from behind while he was trying to climb out of the narrowing wash. The flood carried mud, rocks, and debris through the canyon at high speed, leaving him almost no room to escape. Rangers found pieces of the damaged headset nearly half a mile downstream the next morning, and Leo's body was recovered later that afternoon beneath debris wedged between the canyon walls. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by blunt force trauma and drowning during a flash flood. Afterward, the beta navigation system was quietly removed from testing. To me, Leo's story feels like a warning from the future, but this last case proves the canyon doesn't just kill people with falls. Sometimes the weather itself slowly becomes the real danger after one small mistake. It was November 2nd, 2013, at Lipan Point on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Around 5 in the afternoon, the canyon was glowing deep orange as the sun dropped behind the cliffs. The overlook had mostly quieted down by then, with only a few tourists and college students lingering near the stone walls. Mila Rowan was 22 years old, a fashion student from Albuquerque trying to build a transfer portfolio strong enough to get her into a bigger design school. Inside her program, people respected her because she obsessed over details and knew how to make even cheap clothes look high-end on camera. And according to people around her, Mila could get incredibly stubborn once she locked onto an idea. If she thought the shot mattered, she would ignore sore feet, rough terrain, or pretty much anything else to make it happen. The three of them had driven to Lipan Point specifically for the sunset lighting. Mila wore narrow high heels because she believed they completed the entire look. The problem was that the overlook wasn't smooth ground at all. It was uneven limestone, loose gravel, and shallow cracks running through the rock. At first, everything was going perfectly, and the lighting looked exactly how Mila wanted. But as the sun dropped lower, she moved closer to the edge for one final runway-style shot. One classmate told her to switch into flats because the ground was rougher there, but Mila refused. She kept saying the heels completed the look, and honestly, I think she convinced herself the last shot would only take a few seconds anyway. Halfway through the walk, Her right heel slipped into a crack between two limestone slabs. The heel jammed, snapped clean off, and her body jerked sideways. Her ankle folded underneath her as she stumbled toward the wall. She caught the top of it for a split second before her momentum carried her over the edge. About 15 feet below the overlook was a narrow limestone shelf running along the canyon wall, and Mila slammed onto it hard before rolling against the rock face. At first, she was still conscious. That's the part that makes this case so hard to think about. She was crying, trying to move, and repeatedly telling her classmates that her leg hurt. Rangers later determined the fall likely fractured her pelvis and severely injured one leg, making it almost impossible for her to climb back up on her own. But because the ledge was partially hidden from above, rescuers couldn't safely lower equipment down to her before nightfall. And this is the point where the story really started feeling awful. After sunset, the canyon temperature dropped fast, and Mila was still wearing thin clothes meant for the photo shoot, not for spending an entire night injured on a cold rock ledge. As the hours passed, the wind through the canyon just kept getting colder. Her classmates stayed at the overlook, while rangers worked on setting up a technical rescue route that wouldn't risk knocking loose rock onto her position below. For several hours, rescuers were still able to hear Mila responding weakly from the ledge. But as the night went on, her voice became quieter and more difficult to hear. While researching canyon rescue cases, one thing that really surprised me was how fast the temperature can drop after sunset. A lot of people hear Arizona and just imagine non-stop heat, but inside the canyon, nights can get brutally cold, especially if someone is injured, stuck in one place, and exposed to wind for hours. By early morning, rescuers finally reached the shelf where Mila had fallen, but by then, she was unresponsive. She was pronounced dead at the scene shortly afterward. The medical examiner later ruled the death accidental. Mila died from environmental exposure and hypothermia, complicated by traumatic injuries from the fall. The injuries left her trapped on the ledge long enough for the overnight cold to slowly overwhelm her body. Afterward, one image from the shoot quietly spread among students and local photographers. Mila's broken high heel still sitting near the overlook wall in the orange sunset light. Months later, her classmates finished the portfolio review Mila had been preparing for and dedicated the project to her.